Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sift through philosophy to find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Greg Sadler. Today we're talking about
our 6 favorite books and why they are favorites. And it might sound a little self-indulgent, but, we've put in, now today over 100 episodes. So I think we get to do this, right?
Sure.
And, we thought about this as a topic and we decided on 3 each, which is kind of a good number. It's tricky. Both of us are people who I think, like a lot of our listeners, spent a lot of our time in our lives reading books. We grew up with them. And, not every single book that you read has a major impact on you, but a lot of them stick with us over time. So we're going to be talking about those that have made some sort of significant and lasting impact that maybe changed the way that we see the world or our lives or ourselves. And they can become a favorite. And I actually think that one of the criteria for this is, do you want to keep reading the book again? Mm-hmm. Right? If you read the book once and you're like, I'm done with this, I've gotten everything I wanted from it, is it really your favorite?
Right. And I think, once again, this is not like an exhaustive list. We've got more than 3 favorite books, and they're probably not exactly in this order, but it's favorite in that they are impactful and they have something to be shared.
Yeah. And we changed our focus for it a little bit because, this show's about how to use philosophy to improve your life. So we thought maybe we would just focus on the top 3 books that help us to live a good life. And I'll take the responsibility for it. I said, well, we should broaden it just to our favorite books altogether, whether they made our life better or not. Now, of course, they're going to have made our life better in some way, but, we're getting away from just, ethics and personal improvement to widen our scope. And I don't know, what do you think? There could be an argument there for there's many different ways to improve one's life. Mm-hmm. Would you say? And I
think, the idea of what is that quote that a man lives but one life, but a reader lives 1,000.
Oh,
and it's not quite exactly the quote, but it's very close to it. Just the idea that even if you're just reading, fiction or biographies or whatever, you're getting this other experience of someone, other life at another time, another gender, position, race, whatever, and it gives you a broader experience of the world than just your narrow one that you happen to be living.
There's 2 authors that makes me think of, neither of which I put into the favorite book thing. One is Seneca. He's got this on the shortness of life, and he suggests that we can get ourselves more life by reading books and using the life that previous authors poured into their books. We can't actually get numerically more years, but we can kind of, intensify them or expand them to some degree by doing exactly what you're talking about. And then there's a 20th century author, Wayne Booth, I think it was, who wrote a book called The Company We Keep. And he was saying, he was I think an English teacher and, teacher of literature. And he said that it's really important for us to do exactly what you were talking about. We enter into somebody else's world and they're different than us. And it allows us, if we don't just read it to get it done with and satisfy, a class or a reading challenge, if we really linger there, we come to see the world partly through their eyes, and it can make us more empathetic or widen our horizons. And I think there's really something to that,
Right. It's a much cheaper way of doing travel. And it's the only way that we can kind of do time travel as well.
Yeah, all you need is a library card, right? Or nowadays, internet connection, because you can get a lot of these things online, whether pirated or legitimately.
No. And I also love TV and movies, but like there's another thing like conjuring the worlds that these authors have written for you in your own mind's eye. That is also a practice I would think is useful to do.
Yeah. And I think we've talked about this before, if not on the show, certainly in our conversations, that there's some things that the visual medium of TV and film can't do as effectively. Like you can do a lot of voiceovers, but that doesn't capture interior monologue as well as words on a page, where it could go on and, you know, the characters thinking to themselves the entire chapter. You try doing that in a TV show and the executives are going to say, no, we can't do that. People are going to get bored with it. But we don't get bored when we're reading it.
Right, absolutely. Well, almost ever. Like I've definitely had some books like, did not finish. I don't need to finish that.
Yeah, actually, that's something we weren't going to talk about this, but I think people should give themselves permission. If a book isn't turning out well for you, you don't have to read it. Like I will cop and say I've never read the whole of James Joyce's Ulysses because I was reading it because all my like literature friends were saying, "Oh, it's so amazing." And I started reading it and I worked my way, I don't know, through maybe couple dozen pages. And I was like, I don't really want to stay in this guy's private little universe with all the linguistic puns. I got other stuff to do. And you feel a little bad when you do something like that. Or, you know, Proust's remembrance of things past. I read the first book in it and I was like, yeah, not for me, you know. A lot of people really get into that, but we don't all have to like the same thing.
Are there any philosophers that you've tried to read and just like, no, just can't deal with this?
Oh, there have been, but I don't remember who they are because it hasn't happened for a while. But and it's not really like ancient and medieval and even modern philosophers where I was like, this is a waste of my time. It was more like 20th century thinkers where I was like, I see why people think this person's important, but I'm not feeling it, as we say, right? Have there been some for you?
Like I know you've done your whole series on Hegel. I found him to be
tedious.
Yeah, it's hard to like read him for more than 20 pages, I'd say.
Yeah, somebody was saying in Substack today it was in LinkedIn because I posted kind of a joking thing about stolen valor, claiming you'd read the Phenomenology when you haven't. And he was like, the Phenomenology is super fun to read, and the Science of Logic is not fun to read. And I was like, well, first of all, if you actually like Hegel, both of them can be fun. Sure. But second, the fact that you said that the Phenomenology is super fun to read, that tells me you haven't read the Phenomenology. There are philosophy books, like the ones that we're going to talk about, that are really fun to read. You know,
they are. So, speaking of that, we have books for us to talk about.
So you were gonna do the first one, right?
Yeah. So the first one here is a book, kind of a popular book in the last 15, 20 years or something. And it's *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind* by Yuval Noah Harari. And I guess it's basically a survey course on anthropology in a book, or as he calls it, a brief history of humankind. It's not particularly deep, and it's not producing anything that would I would call specifically groundbreaking, but it is it's a intro to a world that a lot of us don't usually dig into as much, and it had a number of ideas that I still use as major ways to see the world today, and so that's like the main reason why I find it to be my favorite. So it's got a number of things like Dunbar's number, intersubjective truths, and the fact that our modern world is built out of these useful fictions like money, corporations, and nations. So obviously just threw out a whole bunch of things there. I will describe them, and I assume that was your question.
Well, I mean, the idea that I guess it could be a revelation to some people that money and corporations and nations aren't really real things in the sense that, like, our fingers are, or the headphones that we're wearing right now are. That's probably not that mind-blowing to people, but I think Dunbar's number is really an interesting idea, and it's made its way. I think a lot of people know it, but they don't know it under that name, right?
Right. So first, starting off with Dunbar's numbers, about 200 people is the amount of people that we can have close relationships and understand all the interrelationships between those groups of those people. And so, like, if we look back in history, like, no individual tribal group is ever really much larger than 200 people. The tribes tend to, like, split off or whatever because you can't have those direct interrelationships. But with creations of certain sort of ideas, that allow groups to work together even when they don't have these direct familial or close friend relation groups, allow us to work together in much larger groups for much larger purposes without having to have those close relations. And this is one of the things that at least he and others in his field say is one of the main things that allow us to have progressed beyond just being cavemen, is that we were able to band together in very large numbers. An example, he says, like, you can have more than 200 people in an airplane and everything is perfectly fine, but you put 200 chimpanzees in the airplane and shit is going to go off the walls.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of ties into one of the things we did a number of episodes on about when norms start to break down. Those norms that people just kind of take for granted are what allow you to move beyond that 200 to 2,000 to, much larger people that you don't actually know. You can rely on them. And when they start getting eroded or taken away, then we start to become tribal, and it starts reverting back down to the who do I know, who I can trust, right?
So the example he brings up early in the book is the Crusades, and it was a whole bunch of different people from a whole bunch of different states or kingdoms, but the Pope said, hey, you're all going to go on a crusade. And so a guy from France and a guy from England and a guy from Germany all came together, and they would usually potentially be enemies, but because they're all under this idea of the Catholic Church saying we're going to work and band together, they were able to, even though they didn't know each other and might have been enemies other times, were able to work together perfectly fine.
Yeah, it reminds me of something. When I took anthropology, I think they called it vertical segmentation, and they were talking about these very warlike tribes that they hated each other and they'd fight each other unless there was some common enemy that they could all, line up together, and then suddenly everything's great between them until that common enemy's gone, and then it all breaks down again. I think that's pretty common in human societies. So what are people going to get out of reading this book?
Well, I guess both of these ideas, there's a couple of others, and you get it's a kind of an overview of human development all the way from the prehistoric times to today. It's a little bit of a look under the hood of how most of what we think as a society are just set up as a set of agreed upon fictions that benefit us, and that they are tools to be used, that when we find that those tools no longer serve us, we can put them down and pick up other tools. And this idea of intersubjective truths, and I've talked about this a number of times, but and it's not like an incredibly new idea or anything, but here's a cup. That's a fairly objective truth. I think the color of this cup is yellow and white, but my perception of that is phenomena and not the noumena. And so that's a subjective truth that I see, and it might be slightly different from you, especially because I have a slight red-green color blindness. And it's not bad. But intersubjective truths are things that we, like fictions like money, and we all agree upon them, but because we all agree upon them, they have impact on the world like they were objective truths. And think of this idea of divine right of kings, and that was a very essential existence part of the world. That was how it was set up, and everyone just followed followed belong behind the kings because they thought that they were God given, and until that idea was gone, and then no one was going to follow the king anymore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This term intersubjective, you see it a lot in 20th century philosophy and certain strains like phenomenology, where they talk about that a lot. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting too, because one of the other terms that gets thrown around a lot today is social construct. People will say right. X is a social construct, and then people get really worked up about that because they're like, no, it isn't. It's natural. It's it's in the nature of things. And you're like, hey, man, it just means that it's something that society and we all kind of get together on, and it's okay. Almost everything's a social construct when you come down to it, in some sense, right? There can be a natural basis for it, but choosing, well, you brought up colors, right? Choosing to distinguish different colors from each other, that's socially constructed. Different societies do it in different ways, and that's okay. It's not the end of the world if we figure that out.
But as you said, there are still lots of people who like, I don't like the word social construct. Yeah. In part because I don't feel like it gives you like the better understanding of it. Yeah. That's why I like the intersubjectives. It's the same thing. But people get really, really upset about that thing and will potentially harm people or do all sorts of nasty things. And it's like, oh man, like these are just tools. They're not that important. Like.
Yeah, and I suppose too, when they rely upon them, if they're revealed as being intersubjective truths or social constructs, that can really shake their identity and their sense of purpose, and I mean, it could lead to them like hurting themselves as well. So yeah.
So you have a book for us.
Mine is going to be a little bit more. Of a pedestrian choice. I mean, it's a philosophy show, so some people will say that Harari is a philosopher, but this guy definitely is. Aristotle, the Nicomachean Ethics. It's one of the earliest systematic works that analyzes key ideas in moral philosophy, and it's aimed at helping people understand what you need to live a good life. And I teach it like almost every single semester in some class or another. We're actually teaching it this week in the class that I'm teaching right now. And, people find it very helpful. He's aiming at what is happiness for us, what kind of relationships should we have. It's a long work, and Aristotle does ramble a lot. He's an acquired taste for reading, but the more that you read him, the more I think you come to appreciate him. And it's interesting. I think you and I have talked about this before. When I first read Aristotle in college, I thought he was the dumbest thing ever. I was taking an ancient philosophy class, and we read the Nicomachean Ethics as well as the categories. And I was like, he's either wrong about stuff, in which case, why do I want to spend time on him? Or the stuff he's saying is just common sense. And then I had somebody who like pointed out to me, well, he's the reason it's common sense. His ideas that he's passed on down. And then, fortunately, there were people who took him seriously when I was in grad school, and that kind of helped me. For me, and I don't know if this is the case for you, Dan, but for me, when I see somebody who I actually like respect and I think is a thoughtful person taking an author seriously that I haven't taken seriously, I'm usually like, well, there must be something there that I missed, right? Is that the case for you?
I don't like. I might have to actually say Aristotle as well, because I got a friend who both really likes and also hates Aristotle.
Well, that's great, because they're going to be motivated to really dig into it, but they're also going to be, they're not going to be like a fanboy. Right?
No, he's definitely not a fanboy, but he will point out, it's like, oh no, this was actually really good. I was actually having a conversation with him recently. It's like, I don't know if he said his argument was that he didn't know if there's any other philosopher that has a more complete corpus of philosophy than Aristotle, a more like complete project.
That is an interesting point. I mean, of surviving stuff, I think you could say he's definitely at the top, right?
Mhm.
We know that there were ancient philosophers who really did systematic work across like all the different areas of philosophy, but we know just the titles of their works. So like Chrysippus, the great Stoic, although most of his stuff is in logic, you know, he doesn't do that much other stuff, but the titles are, you know, incredibly intriguing. So yeah, I think that's on the whole right. I really like Aristotle because every time that I reread him, I actually just had to finish up a book chapter that I was asked to write, and it involved going back into the text, and I'd be like, oh man, I forgot about that. That's really a good idea there. I appreciate him even more. And so he's become a really important conversation partner for me. I think that other people could get a lot out of reading Aristotle. That's why I teach him in classes. I don't have high hopes usually for people reading Aristotle because I remember how, you know, I didn't enjoy him at first, but I do think that he provides you not with every tool you need, but a number of them that can help you like figure out, hey, what's wrong with me? How can I make my life better? Am I oriented towards the wrong things? Do I need to work on these parts of my character? I think that's really valuable, you know? So
it reminds me, I was having a conversation with someone who's at least a decade younger than myself, and it's like, yeah, I like the Beatles, and she's like, I don't see anything in them, and I'm like have you like read or listened to either like Sergeant Pepper's or Rubber Soul? And she's like, yeah, I've listened to them, and I'm like, but they're kind of like pedestrians. Like, yeah, but like now they are like they're those were these seminal works that beforehand it was like, I want to hold your hand.
Sappy stuff, yeah.
It's so boring. It's like here's three chords. It's like, oh no, we're gonna like have a symphony of different. You know, it. The reason why it seems pedestrian now is because exactly they said it. Like that's the one that made it common sense, or that's what made it.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of things like that. You know, we treat certain kinds of foods as more of that crap now, but you know we don't remember like when we first encountered. You're going to find this one crazy because I'm quite a bit older, and you know I grew up in essentially the sticks in Wisconsin, and I remember when I first had tacos, and it wasn't like tacos like we have now. It was the taco kit with the hard shell C. Ortega stuff. And it was at a birthday party for one of our neighbors. And this was like the new thing. So he had ground beef cooked in that taco, like seasoning stuff, shredded cheese, lettuce, and tomatoes. That was it. No sour cream, no salsa, because that was like way, way down the line.
Right.
And we kids ate this and we were like, holy crap, this is amazing. I've never tasted anything. And it's not like we didn't have, various ethnic foods before, right? But this is like a revelation. Now you say that to somebody now and they're like, we got like 30 different taco places within, 5 miles of here, any kind of taco you can think of. What are you talking about? Well, there's something to this experience of, trying something out new for the first time and making it part of your now life, I guess,
So you're younger than my parents.
Yeah.
And my mom's told me about like the first time the pizza place came to town.
Oh, really?
And apparently that was before your time.
Yeah. Pizza. We had plenty of pizza,
That was a revelation as well. And now it's so pedestrian, but it's great still.
It was a revelation for me in high school though with pizza.
What?
So, we would get frozen pizzas, and here in Wisconsin, Tombstone was like the most common one. If you had money, you'd get like Red Baron or something. And I remember going for a sleepover at a friend's house freshman year of college, and his dad gave us some money. We went to Pick and Save, and he said, "Get some pizzas. You'll make some pizzas tonight." So we did that. We come back, and I like picked out a good pizza for myself, and then we were there at his place, and we're putting him on the counter, and then I see my friend Eric, and he's like putting other stuff on top of the pizza.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, "You can do that?" And he's like, "We do this all the time." And I won't say my mind was blown, but I had never thought, yeah, I mean, you get a pizza, it's got what it's got on it. You're stuck with that. Right. And he was like, no, you can put cheddar. You don't have to have mozzarella cheese. You can also put cheddar cheese on it. And I was like, "You can mix cheeses?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course you can." He's looking at me like I'm stupid or something.
It's like, are you keeping to the Jewish Bible? You can't like mix cheeses? It's only got to be one cheese?
Yeah. There you go.
That's great. Honey on pizza, amazing, by the way.
Yeah, I know people put hot honey too,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well,
so I guess
speaking of bee products, we should talk about your next book, because he's got that great metaphor of the bee and the hive and stuff.
Yes. What are you doing? Why are you sitting under your covers? Why don't you set to work like the bees and the hive and the what's called the animals in the fields? You have something to do. Is your job to sit under the covers and be comfortable and hide away from the world, or is your job to do the work of a man? A paraphrasing, but if you hadn't figured it out already, we were talking about good old Marky Golden Boy, or Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome and author of the book Meditations. But it's not exactly a book per se, but it is a notebook, a personal journal of one's work in trying to actually maintain a philosophically moral life. And it's I find it to be absolutely engrossing. You have any thoughts originally?
Donald Robertson, who's written a lot about Marcus Aurelius, he said something to me that was really interesting. And I think I mentioned this to you before. So Donald is a cognitive behavior therapist, and they are kind of inspired to some degree by Stoicism, and Marcus is a Stoic, probably more than by Epictetus. But Donald said, here's what he said. He said, there are classics for cognitive behavior therapy, like, Albert Ellis's Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy books, or Burns's Feeling Good. But usually people read them once and then they're like, okay, I'm done. Maybe I need to go back to the chapter on depression or anxiety or anger or something. And the Stoics, like Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius or Seneca, are doing a lot of the same stuff, but people will reread these books 100 times. And he was like, what is it about these books that, is covering a lot of the same ground that hooks people in that the CBT and REBT literature doesn't? And his view was like, there's an actual like person there, somebody who we can relate to, which is weird, right? Because Burns and Ellis are 20th century writers. We should be able to relate to them more easily than some guy who's in charge of the Roman Empire. But somehow we get hooked into it, right? There's something compelling about it.
Like, I feel you could potentially write a book that was in the vein of the Meditations, and it might have that same hook. But like, these books by Ellis and Burns, they're much more, academic. They're like, here's the thing, we're going to set it out, here are the processes, here's maybe some practices that you can work with. But these are, like, as he said, it's a real human being, and sometimes he fails. He screws up, and it's like, man, I could have been better. It's like, man, these guys are really dicks today, and I might have blown my top a little bit, and I got to remember that they're not evil, they just don't have the correct conception of what is good. And I'm like, oh God. And it's like, yeah, it's that real life, practice of doing it. It's like, yeah, I know I have a standard. I didn't quite hit it, or I did it pretty well, but let me like remark upon it and think about it. Or maybe I saw something and it made me think about it. And every day I'm just trying to make sure that I'm, working a little bit towards it in a much more robust sense. And I think that's the thing that pulls you.
I think if somebody doesn't know that it's him writing to himself, and they read it and they think that it's Marcus like talking to the reader, it seems a lot more preachy, right? But then when you realize that like every single thing, like you said, that he's talking about is him reminding himself, hey, you need this because otherwise you're going to screw up, man. I know you well enough at 60 years old that you're going to like blow your top. I mean, the first one in book 2, right? You're going to meet a bunch of a-holes in the morning. Remind yourself of these things. You know, that's because he's already like blown his top at him a whole bunch of times.
Right.
Otherwise, he's not writing it to himself.
Exactly. And that's my favorite little section of that book. Yes. How did I come across this book? It's really shortly after I started getting into Stoicism in the first place. I was doing an all-nighter in college, and I was working on a bioinformatics class. And I was coding, and I just needed to like dump everything out of my brain. So because I was like so into it, I was like, no, I just need to like step back from this for a second. I was just surfing the internet. I found a short introduction to Stoicism by Tim Ferriss, and I just got hooked, and I started devouring everything I could from the Stoics. And once you're into it a little bit, like you find some people's like, yeah, you should be reading the originals. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll read the ancients, and I picked up Marcus Aurelius pretty quick after, and I spent like a week. In my free time, I just went to the coffee shop. It was a place that you just buy one coffee and you can just sit in the corner. And I sat and I just read through it very slowly, and I underlined everything that I thought was important. And I still love that particular copy of my book because it was such an early formative memento of my getting into Stoic philosophy, but also as especially that translation. It's by Gregory Hayes.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's the best prose. It might not be the exact best translation, but I think it's the best prose of all the translations I've read.
I haven't like surveyed all of the translations, but I do know that a lot of them, when you go back to the original Greek, you'll be like, okay, I see how they're getting that. It's not exactly the same. I will actually warn people off of Waterfield. The annotated Marcus Aurelius, because when we were at Stoic camp, there were all sorts of problems with people reading, and they'd be like, what the hell is he talking about? And then I'd go and look up the Greek, or the other guy would, and we'd be like, that's not what he's saying at all. But most of them are pretty close. It's tough to convey, with Aristotle or Marcus, you're dealing in a foreign language, and a language that's long since passed. It's pretty tough to... there's no one-to-one, correspondence that you can do. You gotta play a little bit fast and loose with what you say. So I actually think readability is important.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of the reasons why I got pulled into it so well is that like it's just a very enjoyable read. It's also the way that it's formatted.
Okay.
Sometimes he talks about lists and something, and then Hayes had like format it and like wrote down bullet points. And I've looked at other ones, especially the Waterfield. It's like, oh my god, this is so much easier to see what the heck he's actually talking about versus this like it's just kind of smashed in this paragraph.
I suppose some sort of purist would be like, well, they didn't have bullet points back in ancient Rome. But I mean, who cares? I mean, if Marcus were around today, he would want it to be as understandable as possible. And we write, I mean, I don't actually like make a little bullet point. I just like draw a dash myself, but I do list stuff like that when I'm writing to myself.
And so I guess I talked about all of this already. I guess things that I like about it, besides the things we've already talked about, is it's sometimes serious and sometimes funny, but it's also deeply profound. And it's the private life thoughts of the most powerful person in the world who is honest with himself that he fails and tries to do the right things and be a good man. And that was just like, it pulled me in so hard in that regard.
Yeah. What do you think people will get out of reading it?
I guess a look into the life of someone who has a goal of living a good and fulfilling life while doing his duty of his position as the Emperor of Rome, an example of someone using Stoic practices in practical situations that would be difficult for anyone to navigate. It's a beautiful set of prose describing the beauty of being alive and how to give thanks for and deal with the people in your lives ethically and with compassion.
Yeah, there's that whole first book of it, right? Which is
Right.
all thanks for
Giving
this,
thanks.
thanks for that.
Yeah.
It's kind of a good way to start.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe that's the first gratitude journal.
Maybe that we know of, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought about that, but that's become a very popular a practice approach these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah.
Any final thoughts, or do you want to talk about your next book?
Nah, we'll jump in. I don't want us to like run out of time. So my second favorite book is going to be kind of a weird one, I think, for a lot of people. It's Jorge Luis Borges's Labyrinths. And this book is a set of short stories and some essays and even parables written by this guy, Jorge Luis Borges, who is a great Argentinian speculative fiction writer and poet, who he's read a lot of philosophy. He's also read lots of literature and psychology and theology, and he works all of this stuff into his stories. And I'll also mention too that there is a collected fictions that takes all of his stories together, and so it's a comprehensive thing. Labyrinths is not that. Labyrinths is a shorter, more selective thing, geared more towards his earlier stories. And I first encountered him in college, and I just kind of fell in love with his writing. I was in a world lit class, I think it was, and we had to read The Garden of Forking Paths, which is a really cool story. It's supposed to be a spy story, but it sneaks in all these metaphysical speculations about the nature of time, and it's even got a cool model. Sometimes we're like, you make a decision, one universe goes this way, the other goes this way. Well, for him, it's the Garden of Forking Paths, because eventually they come back together. And so there's that going on. There's also this story that's being told within the story of a Chinese labyrinth. And I won't ruin it for the people who want to read it, but I read that and I was like, man, this is good stuff. And so I went out to a bookstore and I bought Labyrinths. I was like, I want to read some more Borges. And I just carried it around everywhere, and I probably bored the hell out of people talking about it constantly. I had the intention of writing, which I might still do before, I get too old and die off, a set of commentaries on it, saying here's what's going on in it. And I was going to title it 14 Infinite, after one of the lines of his story, The House of Asterion, where 14 means infinite. And the idea is something finite could stand for the infinite. And that's kind of a cool idea. So he is what you could call a philosophical fiction writer. And you and I are both attracted to them. We've talked a lot about Philip K. Dick before. Kafka is another example of a philosophical fiction writer. We could also say Dostoevsky was in his own way. I also really like Roger Zelazny and Ursula K. Le Guin from that generation that Dick was in. Ken Liu, who we were talking about before we got started with the show, I'd say he's a good representative of that as well. And there's others too that are doing some cool speculative fiction in their stories. Borges manages, so some of these people write big, long, thick novels. Borges just writes short stories. And he does so much in each of these intricate, beautiful short stories or essays or parables, and he kind of lures you in, and they stick with you, and you think about them afterwards. It's sort of like Platonic dialogues. When you read a real Platonic dialogue and you're really paying attention to it, you're sucked into the story. And you're like, well, what if this has to be interpreted this way? So it makes you work. You have to do your thinking. And I find there's a kind of enjoyment for me that comes with exercising and stretching your mind like that. And I also find myself really in awe of how good he is at it. you know.
Mhm.
I wish I could write stories like that, but I can't. I've tried my hand at it, and that's not where my vocation lies, you know. So I think it's a really great book. I mean, people could also get the, you know, complete stories if they want to, but it's nice. It's small. You can carry it around. It's a lot of fun. I guess the translations, I don't read Spanish, so I guess the translations in Labyrinths are considered not as good as the translations in the collected fictions, but they're good enough for me. And that's, I mean, have you read Borges? I should have asked you
No,
this
not at all.
beforehand. Oh, well, maybe you will, and you'll see if it's a treat or if I'm leading you astray, you know, whatever
But
you
we
think.
tend to have a fairly, you know, similar path
yeah.
or interest in our, especially our speculative fiction.
Yeah, I think you probably would enjoy
Yeah.
him.
So, did you tell me what you think people will get out of it?
Well, it depends very much on what kind of stories you like. You know, like if you're into romance novels or mercenary novels or westerns, probably you're not going to like it that much, you know, or mysteries where everything is neatly solved by the end. Probably not going to work.
Oh,
But if you
very
like,
much Dick-like.
What's that?
Very much Philip K. Dick-like.
Yeah, another thing that he has in common with Dick, he doesn't expect reality to be completely consistent. You know.
Yeah.
And
that, oh man, I remember like, oh, you remember when Inception came out?
Oh yeah,
and it ends on the cliffhanger.
People were mad.
People were. It's like, I want to know. You got to tell me. It's like it's got to be one or the other. It's like that's the point, that they're trying to get you to think about this and like make your own decision about.
Like, I don't want to think.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think if you like that kind of thing, then Borges is probably like one of the best people out there, even today. And he like sucks you into these thought experiments, and you're also getting introduced to all the people that Borges has read too, which is cool. So I've read some philosophers because Borges mentioned them.
Really?
People I hadn't read at that time. And I'm like, well, there must be something to it if Borges is talking about it. So I think, people, I don't know, compared to the Nicomachean Ethics or Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, they probably have broader appeal than these stories, but I think it could still be for a lot of people,
What do you think about like Heinlein? Like, I don't think it's nearly as like robust, but there's a little bit of philosophy and stuff.
I think it depends on he's kind of I won't say schizophrenic because you don't want to like diagnose somebody, but in the broad sense of like he's got a lot of different ways of doing things. Like so some of the early stories, Starship Troopers definitely has a philosophy animating it, and it's a very different philosophy than what's that one with the Martian? I'm blanking on the name. He comes down from Mars.
A Stranger in a
Strange Land. Yeah, that's also got a philosophy behind it, right?
It's very different than you're right.
Yeah, and so he definitely was a thinker. And then you get these longer novels later on where there's actually like philosophical discussions going on in them. The Job one or.
Early on, like Starship Troopers has like a number of times where they're like, "We're going to sit you down and have a lecture about like the philosophy of our civilization and how things should work." It's not like I would say that he didn't just start that later in life.
That's right. Yeah. But in the longer, Starship Troopers is not a long novel. Job, I forget the subtitle of it. That's like 500 pages or so, I think. So there's more room for doing that. The Moon is a harsh mistress. It's a lot of people read it and they're like, it's just kind of it's not an adventure story. It's kind of a political story. But I actually think it's quite good. They're debating about, is it okay to like launch big rocks down and hit cities on Earth to defend the moon colonies? And it turns out the answer is yes.
Right.
So I like Heinlein. Philip Jose Farmer would be another one in there too, who he's got some philosophical meat on his bones,
Although of these, I think probably some of the best is Ursula K. Le Guin. Like she gets into some really deep stuff.
And she can do it with just, the shortest. Her Earthsea books. They're called novels. Not a single one of them's a novel. They're all novellas. Because they're 150 pages tops. But she does so much in just a paragraph. So
even her short story was that the those who walked away from Omelas. It's just basically the what is it, the something conclusion of utilitarianism. It's the abhorrent conclusion. Is that the right word?
That's something different where you have tons and tons of beings, but they all live kind of crappy lives.
Oh, that's right.
The repugnant conclusion, right?
Right. Yeah.
This is it isolates it just to one person, and
it's still a kind of an argument, at least against basic utilitarianism.
That's right.
Still has a short story.
Yeah, but left ambiguous. I mean, she says, most people stay in it. What would you do?
Right.
And she doesn't say you should leave the city. She's saying, what kind of person are you? I actually use that at the beginning of ethics classes. I have my students read that and think about it.
How is that discussion?
Oh, they get mad.
Oh yeah.
Because well, I won't ruin it for anybody who hasn't read it, because you kind of do have to read it. But we should talk about your next one, which is also connected to speculative fiction.
Yeah. So the book is The Hydrogen Sonata, and it's a book by Ian M. Banks. It's actually his final book, both in his culture novels series, but also in his life, because he wrote it while he was dying of cancer. And so it's a really interesting novel in that it is both a meditation on death as well as the things that we leave behind. And so he wrote and finished the novel shortly before he passed of cancer. It is a capstone to the series and of his life. The plot is of an alien civilization that's preparing to, in the speculative fiction world, sublime. It's an analogy for death, like a whole species basically turns into some energy and ascends to a higher level of existence. And so they're going to sublime in mass, but as an emissary is sent to give them a final message that may disrupt the process for billions of the Gazilt people, and the Gazilt are the civilization here. And so I guess I came across this book because it is the final book in the series. I've been a fan of his for quite a while, specifically his culture novels. And the culture novels are a highly advanced, is a sci-fi series that deals with the highly advanced people called the culture. It is an interaction with other species over the course of centuries. And I guess I don't really recall exactly how I first came upon his books, but it was definitely in the milieu of if you know sci-fi, people are like, oh, you should read some Ian M. Banks. He does really well. I was like, okay, I picked up one, and I couldn't let them down.
Now, did you start at the start and then proceed all the way to book 10, or did you read some of them out of order? Or
that's the good thing about them, because you don't need to read them in order.
I was gonna talk about that a little bit later.
I think I did start with Consider Phlebas.
Okay.
Which is the first one, and it's also the one that is most unlike all the others. And so I would say that if you're actually interested in the novels, don't start with that one. I would say start with Player of Games, the second one.
Okay.
Because it's much more representative of the entire series as a whole. Read Consider Phlebas. Totally do that. But if you want to know if I want to read, 8 more books or 9 more books, read that one.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But Consider Phlebas is a great space opera. It's it sounds like it would make the most amazing movie, and it's probably, I would say, the least contemplative. It's very actiony, but there's some good ideas in there.
They haven't turned any of his stuff into shows or movies, have they?
No, I think part of it is that they're so giant in order to do them properly. like I guess you could potentially do them via animation or something. It would be a lot easier.
Probably, yeah, that would make sense. I think you probably also should talk about. So you mentioned the culture series. Well, what is the culture? Because I mean, that's a grand idea that, in a way, it realizes what Star Trek's Federation is just hinting at. Maybe
Scratching the surface of.
Yeah.
What was it? How do they call it? Fully automated, luxury gay space communism.
Yeah.
I think is, or socialism. No, like everyone's needs are met within the culture. You have the ability to basically choose whatever thing that you want to do in life and go do it. The culture has so much resources and basically infinite energy, at least to what any individual would need, to go out and fulfill those needs. There's transhumanism, like people will like turn into other species or live among other species as that species. They have the ability to have all sorts of like drugs landed in their heads. So it's like you need to get rid of your headache. You get rid of that. You need to have something to give you attention really quick. You can do that, or you can go into your like body's system settings and say, I would like to be the other gender and potentially have a child in that gender and then switch back. So a lot of like couples in the culture will have a child as a male and then have a child as female, and where both of them switch gender halfway through. All sorts of just like, if you can think it, like they have it, like, and they've got like later on, especially in what is that one? It doesn't matter. They've got like neural laces, which are like, brain human interfaces as well. They've got like these incredibly advanced computers, which they call minds, and everyone are considered citizens within the civilization, but the minds are the ones that really kind of like run everything, in the fact that they're just like a billion times more, I guess, intelligent, or at least multitasking as a single entity than any like of us usual humans. They also have smaller robots as well, or minds, and it's not super interesting within the stories of the inside the culture itself, but it's the interaction with the other civilizations when you have like this like super federation. And then they interact with other civilizations, and just like the Federation, like anyone can join the culture. The culture isn't like a species specific; it's just like a general grouping of ideas.
Yeah, but you do have, what do they call it? Like special, it's special something.
Special circumstances.
Special circumstances. The people who don't. A lot of people would be like, "Oh, this sounds awesome," and then some people are like, "Yeah, I don't know. I think I need more excitement of some kind, or this isn't really fulfilling." And those are the people that are kind of like the buffer between the culture and the not quite, ready for assimilation, joining civilizations, and they do all the cool stuff, right?
They're like your CIA or MI6 or mixed in with like a paramilitary, because like their ships are armed to the teeth if they need to be, and so they go.
If we look at the analogy to the Star Trek and the Federation, we almost always are seeing special circumstances. Starfleet is special circumstances, and then the rest of the vast majority of people are living this fairly. Well, it's not always utopian. The colonists are always getting attacked by the Romulans or Cardassians or, some energy creatures. But if you live in a home world, if you live in a home world, it's pretty good,
Right.
It's, you got replicators to create anything you want. You take whatever classes you want.
And you get like a status in the civilization by creating great things, like, being a great author. Like, what is it? Cisco's father runs a restaurant in New Orleans.
Yeah.
It's just so damn good that everyone goes there because they love it, but like he does it because he loves it.
Yeah, it's a good example. I think his books are really quite interesting. Banks's books. I also they were a recommendation to me. If you like this kind of stuff, you're going to like this kind of stuff. Otherwise, I probably would never have come across them myself, but Yeah. I mean, what do you think people will get out of reading them then?
Them or this book particular? I guess I'm talking about this book particular kind of as a stand-in for the entirety, in part because it does have this like nice little meditation on life. Because like all the Gezilt, as they are waiting to sublime, they've all got like a life task that they've given themselves, and so the Hydrogen Sonata is a what is it called? It's a 10-stringed like instrument that's the one of the main characters. That's her life task, is to do this a sonata that is only designed for this one incredibly difficult to master thing, and it actually requires that she had 2 cybernetic arms added to her body in order to use all 4 bows at one time on this instrument. Like you actually like sit on the instrument that's like all around you and whatnot. It's insane. But she gets pulled out of that because she was nominally part of some military organization. Like everyone in their society has to have like certain military things. Like it's like mandatory. But she gets pulled into that with special circumstances because you find out that there was not a symbol, but a signal sent from this other civilization that already sublimed as well, saying, "Hey, we did something, and it's going to cause a whole bunch of problems for the rest of the Gezilt if it becomes common knowledge." And that's the major conflict of the book. It's very interesting in that because you've got like these kind of this philosophical look at death, as well as put forward through a whole entire civilization, but as well having a this kind of like space opera. Like there's lots of like big fight scenes, and there's a moon that is orbiting a planet so close that there's actually a canyon in which the moon orbits perfectly inside of it. It's just like a really cool set piece. And
we're going to run out of time soon, and so I think we won't worry about the third book on my part. I'll just say Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet. If you haven't read it, you should check it out. But I do want to say this. So when we read these like outlandish sci-fi or fantasy or whatever speculative fiction things, you can say, well, what the hell good does that do us here on Earth? And part of the answer is we can expanding our minds out to these cool issues, problems, like, what would it be like to play on an instrument that you had to sit inside and graft arms onto yourself? The fact that we can think about that stuff, we're humans doing that. All of the speculative fiction is about races that are like way, way beyond us. They exist in our imagination. Mm-hmm. That's something that we produce, or at least the authors that we're interested produce.
And also, it's a lovely little test bed that allows us to deal with ideas without having to have them in a real-world context.
Yeah.
Most of the species in Star Trek are kind of a analogy to certain cultures within the United States or the world here we live in. And like, okay, but like, can we interact with them in a different way than we do because we have our specific prejudices that you don't have to these fake species that we've made up?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So they can perform kind of a teaching task for us. Well, we're almost at the end of our disquisition on our favorite books. Hopefully you go out and read some of these if you haven't, and if you enjoy them yourself, you can always tell us. But do you want to take us out on some final thoughts?
Yeah. We leave you today with the words of Seneca. It is much better to entrust yourself to a few authors than to be misled by an abundance of them.